When it comes to growing herbs, they're some of the most fun crops to grow. In my personal opinion, herbs can not only add a ton of beauty, but also a ton of value into your garden. And there's a lot of misconceptions around growing them that we're going to talk about today, because honestly, if you don't have them in your garden because of some of these misconceptions, you're missing out. The first common misconception is that plants like this, rosemary, need lots of water. Now, overwatering your plants can be a mistake regardless of the type of plant. However, when it comes to Mediterranean, more arid-loving crops, they couldn't be easier to grow and easier to maintain because they kind of don't mind being neglected. It's often us as gardeners that step in trying to kind of micromanage the situation, thinking, well, this is a plant in my garden and plants like lots of water, so 1 + 1 = 2. It's simple math, right? Must like lots of water. Couldn't be further from the truth. If you overwater your rosemary, it's actually going to be struggling and really not thriving to the level that it could be. And so when it comes to a lot of your Mediterranean arid-loving crops, keep it nice and dry. They don't mind the drought. If you have a drought, focus your energy on the plants like tomatoes or more moisture-rich crops that really need the water, because those probably will struggle. Your other crops, they're probably going to be fine. So this is like a low-lying kind of creeping rosemary. This is more of an upright rosemary. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. They absolutely are going to love just some nice, dry, arid conditions. Other crops that fall in this category could be things like sage, oregano, thyme, or even lavender, are all kind of really great, arid, dry-loving Mediterranean crops that aren't going to mind a little bit of drought. All right, second common misconception is that for those that are looking for a low maintenance garden and they don't want to plant their garden out year after year, they just really want to kind of plant it, set it and forget it with mostly perennials, that herbs don't really fall into that category. Now you're missing out on so many herbs. Obviously, I'm sure you're probably well aware of some perennial herbs, but there's a lot of herbs that are perennials that most people don't really think of. And there's also herbs, what I call self-seeding annuals, that are basically perennials. Not technically, but basically perennials, because they act just like perennials. See, plants like this parsley here is actually a perennial. They're a biennial, but because once they flower, you can clip that flower stalk off the second year, they're gonna keep growing. We've grown parsley time and time again for 5-7 years. My parents have it in their garden that I moved away from their house. And whenever we go visit, the parsley's still kicking in my mom's backyard. So parsley is one you can plant and it keeps growing. But there's also crops that a lot of people turn away from, like chamomile, dill, fennel, crops that can grow up. They survive no problem at all. They'll flower, they'll drop those seeds, and yeah, you'll have a few volunteers, but those volunteers grow no problem at all the next year, and you don't have to do anything to maintain them. They just keep growing. Now, obviously, there are some crops that are annuals. Basil is an annual. Lemongrass is an annual. You have a fair amount of annuals, but you also have so many perennials and biennials, chives even, right? A lot of people don't think about chives. Chives are such an easy perennial to grow because they're an allium, they're gonna grow, they're gonna flower the second year. If you don't want them to spread, clip the flowers off. They'll keep growing, no problem at all. Green onions, scallions, they grow super well as well. So don't feel like most of your crops fall into this annual category. A lot are actually perennial or kind of semi-perennial. All right, third common herb misconception is that you can enjoy the flowers and the herbs. This also is a huge misconception. Yes, flowering herbs can be very, very aromatic. They can attract a lot of pollinators to the garden, but unfortunately, you can't have your cake and eat it too. When it comes to herbs, as soon as they start flowering, like this basil here, got really hot the past week, all really started to flower pretty profusely. We have got to get these flowers off, because if we don't, it's going to end up killing the plant. It is such a common misconception, especially with some more of your decorative flowering basils. People like to let them flower because they're very pretty. Well, if you let them flower, just know that their lifespan is going to come to an end very fast after. And so what we want to do is we want to come in here and clip back this basil and really clip it back. It's going to cause it to bush, it's going to cause it to force more growth, and it's going to last a whole lot longer. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that you can let your herbs flower, attract the pollinators, and still have it in your garden. It's just not the case. Same thing with things like dill, almost any of your herbs, once you let them flower fully and the flowers form seeds, the plant has done its job of forming seeds and it's going to die. And so I don't want to see that happen to you. Don't fall into that trap. Come in here and clip all these off, trim them back. You're really going to thank me. You're going to have not only a healthier plant, but a bushier plant. It's going to last longer into the season. You can use this in your kitchen. It smells amazing. But just remember, at some point, I will let these bloom for the pollinators. I love seeing honeybees in the garden. I love seeing bumblebees. Pollinators are so important to our garden. But for me, there's a time and a place. Right now in the middle of our growing season, when we're trying to maximize our harvest, isn't that time. Once we get later into the fall, we've already harvested most of our herbs, really put up a lot of, put a bunch in storage. We have everything we need. Then the rest can be for them. In the fourth and final misconception about herbs that I think is probably the most prevalent that I've seen on forums all throughout the internet is that if they're invasive herbs, like an herb like mint or horseradish, that if you keep them in their container and simply bury the container like this, that the roots will be able to move throughout the soil, but they won't be able to spread out, invading your garden. Now that's sound logic, but unfortunately it's horribly flawed because it's just not true. Prime example is I tried this because I was told the same thing about 7 years ago behind me with mint. I planted mint in this herb planter right there with the expectation that if I just planted the container that the plant would survive just fine. The problem is that plants that spread will continue to spread outside of a container even if they can touch the soil. Prime example is mint. Anywhere where that plant sets on the soil, it'll set down roots. And it will also form flowers that then spread seeds, and that also spreads. So once an invasive herb, always an invasive herb. It doesn't matter how you plant it. And I fell into that mistake, and we've been fighting this very, very invasive patch of mint for the past 7 years. So about 7 years ago, we planted a mint plant right here in the corner. And when it grew up, it trellised over. And we had it in the container that it was planted in. It was about in a 4-inch pot. Grew just fine, trailed over, and set down roots. And now everywhere you look, this is all last year's herbs, or all last year's mint. Just keeps growing, just keeps setting down new roots, spreading that way. It is just, it's unbelievable. It just keeps coming back. No matter how much you pull it, it is in the garden. It is in the garden. Every little bit of stem that touched has now set down roots. So let that be a lesson. Just because you're told you can plant something invasive as long as you keep it contained, that's not the case. It will always be invasive. All right, the fifth and final misconception, this is kind of a bonus misconception, is that herbs need a lot of space to grow. I'm sorry, this is just not true. I have flat out found this to be false in so many cases. Now, whether it's something large like this lemongrass here, lemongrass can handle in being in a pot just fine. Does not mind having its roots slightly crowded. Whether it's thyme, oregano, or sage, they all can handle kind of some more close quarters growing than a lot of your other crops in the garden. And so when it comes to growing more food in less space, I would absolutely turn to herbs, because not only can you fill in those little voids and empty spaces with herbs that are going to grow for you, but it also is going to add to more of a biodynamic garden that's going to help you kind of increase the biodiversity to help with pest control, help grow more food, and just take up that empty space where weeds otherwise would grow. And so those are all the misconceptions I've heard over the years for growing herbs. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to click that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and try growing some herbs. Let me know in the comments box down below what your favorite herbs are to grow. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider checking this one out. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you so much for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. If you haven't subscribed yet, it's free. Consider doing that. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, rain or shine. And if you need any garden tools, supplies, or seeds, check out MIgardener.com. We got you covered. See you guys in the garden. Bye.